Inside the stone walls of Eilean Donan Castle, just 48 men brace for a fight that no one in their right mind would have taken, against not one, not two, but 3 nations at once. And somehow, for a moment, it looks like they might win. If you've ever thought castles were just pretty tourist attractions, you've never heard this story. Because this one was blown apart in a siege so fierce that its walls literally vanished in a cloud of smoke, and yet it refused to be forgotten. Today, it's one of the most photographed castles in the world, but in 1719, it was the last hope of a doomed rebellion. And here's the twist, the people defending it weren't even Scottish. The year is 1719. The Jacobite cause, the movement to put the exiled Stuart king back on the throne, is on life support. The last rebellion in 1715 had ended in disaster. Leaders were executed, supporters hunted down. But revolutions have a way of refusing to die quietly. This time, the rebels had a secret weapon: Spain. Yeah, you heard that right. In the early 1700s, Scotland, England, and Spain were tangled in the War of the Quadruple Alliance, and Spain saw the Jacobites as a perfect way to poke Britain in the eye. So they sent troops. But where could those troops land without being crushed the moment they arrived? Enter Eilean Donan Castle, a tiny fortress on a tiny island at the meeting point of 3 lochs: Loch Duich, Loch Long, and Loch Alsh, a place so isolated and hard to reach that you could hold it with a small force for a long time, if you had enough food, gunpowder, and stubbornness. The plan was bold. Land Spanish soldiers there, use it as a base to arm the local clans, and march south to stir up a full-blown Jacobite uprising. From there, they'd force the British to split their forces and weaken their war effort in Europe. It sounded good on paper, but as history has a habit of proving, plans on paper don't mean much when the enemy's cannons start firing. By April 1719, the first Spanish troops, about 300 men, landed in Scotland. Some moved inland to rally the Jacobite clans. But 48 unlucky men, a mix of Spanish soldiers and Jacobite Scots, were ordered to stay behind and hold Eilean Donan Castle as the main stronghold. Here's the problem. The castle, while defensible, wasn't built for modern siege warfare. Sure, it could take arrows all day, but cannons? Not so much. And the British Navy wasn't going to ignore a rebel base in their own backyard. On May 10, 1719, 3 Royal Navy warships, HMS Worcester, HMS Enterprise, and HMS Flamborough, sailed into the loch. They flew the Union Jack, but in reality, they were the first arm of the 3 nations that would close in on Eilean Donan: Britain, Spain, and hostile local Scottish forces who weren't about to support another failed rebellion. For the men inside, it was do or die. Surrender meant execution. Escape meant being hunted in the Highlands with no safe place to hide. So, they loaded their muskets, primed their powder, and prepared to make the tiny castle the toughest target in Scotland. The first day was chaos. The ships fired warning shots, expecting the defenders to surrender. Instead, they were met with musket fire from the walls. The British ships pulled back, anchored at a safe distance, and opened fire. Cannonballs screamed through the air, smashing into the stone, sending shards flying like shrapnel. The defenders had one advantage. The castle's position meant the ships had to fire from certain angles, and the thickest walls faced the sea. But even thick walls can't take pounding forever. For 3 days, the warships hammered Eilean Donan. Every night, the defenders scrambled to repair damage with whatever they could find: timber, rubble, even furniture. Every morning, the attack began again. By the 3rd day, the defenders were low on powder and running out of food. Then came the moment that changed everything. The ships moved closer. The British had decided to board. The ships moved closer. The defenders could see the British sailors loading muskets, grappling hooks at the ready. This wasn't going to be a distant cannon duel anymore. This was about to get up close and bloody. Inside the castle, the Jacobites and Spanish soldiers braced for impact. They had no illusions. The castle was cracked, food was nearly gone, and the stench of smoke and damp gunpowder hung in the air. But there was something about being cornered that made them fight harder. The British warships opened up one last heavy volley before sending in small boats. Cannon fire shook the walls so hard that chunks of stone fell from the ceiling of the great hall. Some defenders, half-starved, coughed from the dust and smoke, but still clutched their muskets. As the British boats closed in, Spanish soldiers fired down from the battlements, their shots splashing in the water or pinging off the boat's wooden sides. For a moment, it looked like they might keep them back. But the British weren't coming in blind, they had the element of numbers. While the defenders were busy with one boatload of attackers, another came from the blind side, where the castle's walls were weakest. Within minutes, the British were at the base of the walls. They set ladders, climbed under a rain of bullets and rocks, and finally stormed through a side entrance blown open by a well-placed cannon shot. What followed was brutal but short. Outnumbered more than 5 to 1, the defenders were overwhelmed. Musket butts slammed into ribs, bayonets flashed, and shouts echoed through the narrow stone halls. Within minutes, the fight inside was over. The British gathered the survivors in the courtyard, 39 Spanish soldiers and a handful of Jacobite Scots. They were prisoners now. Here's the part of the story that's as shocking as it is grim. The British didn't just want to capture the castle, they wanted to erase it. And they had a reason. When they searched the storerooms, they found something terrifying. Barrels upon barrels of gunpowder, enough to supply a much larger rebellion if it reached the Highland clans. This wasn't just a small garrison. This was a powder keg waiting to ignite a new war. So they made a decision: the castle would be destroyed. Completely. Over the next 2 days, British engineers worked inside Eilean Donan, packing its rooms, stairwells, and even the basement with 343 barrels of gunpowder. The prisoners were marched away under guard while the demolition teams set their charges. When the fuse was lit, witnesses from the nearby shore said the explosion was like thunder rolling across the locks. The blast ripped through centuries-old stone walls, sending chunks of masonry hurtling into the water. Towers crumbled, roofs collapsed. In seconds, Eilean Donan Castle was reduced to little more than jagged walls and piles of rubble. The British left nothing of value behind. The ruins stood like a broken tooth in the mouth of the Highlands, a warning to anyone who thought about defying London. As for the prisoners, the Spanish soldiers were eventually sent back to Spain after being held for months. The Jacobite Scots weren't so lucky. Many were imprisoned in harsh conditions, and some were executed. The bigger picture was even bleaker. The 1719 Jacobite Rising, fueled by Spain's involvement, collapsed. Without the castle as a base and without enough local clan support, the rebels were crushed at the Battle of Glen Shiel just a month later. Spanish troops surrendered there, too, marking the end of Spain's dream of using Scotland as a backdoor into Britain. For nearly 200 years, Eilean Donan lay in ruins. The tides washed around its broken stones. Locals passed by in fishing boats, telling stories of the siege and the explosion. Sheep grazed on its little island. It became a ghost of its former self, more legend than reality. Then, in 1911, a man named Lieutenant Colonel John MacRae Gilstrap decided the castle's story wasn't over. He bought the island and began a restoration that took 20 years. Using old plans, local stone, and a stubborn determination to see the castle rise again, he rebuilt Eilean Donan to match its medieval glory. Today, it's one of the most photographed castles in the world. Tourists walk across its stone bridge, snap pictures of its towers, and buy postcards, often without knowing that the very ground they're standing on once shook with the force of 343 barrels of exploding gunpowder. The legend of Eilean Donan isn't just about a castle. It's about the people who fought their Spanish soldiers who came to a foreign land for a cause they barely knew, Jacobite Scots who gambled everything on an impossible dream, and the British sailors who came determined to end it all. And maybe that's why the story still matters. Because sometimes, even when the odds are ridiculous, people will stand their ground. Not because they think they can win, but because they believe the fight is worth it. So next time you see a picture of Eilean Donan Castle, remember, it's more than a pretty postcard. It's a survivor of one of the strangest, boldest, and most doomed defenses in history. The day 48 men stood against 3 nations and refused to surrender until the walls came down around them.